Good evening, Erev Tov. Welcome to tonight's program with Fred Rosenbaum. Tonight's event is sponsored by the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival and co-sponsored by the Contra Costa Jewish Community Center and Diablo Valley Hadassah. This past month, as all of you know, has been very calamitous. We've experienced some of our darkest days in Israel. And as we worry about our friends and loved ones in that country, we also know about the rising hate in America. Last week, we witnessed the pain and divisiveness caused when the Richmond City Council adopted an inflammatory and inaccurate resolution accusing Israel, the only Jewish country in the world and home to half of the global Jewish population, of, quote, ethnic cleansing and genocide, unquote. And now other groups are working to spread more hate by advocating for other Bay Area cities, such as Sunnyvale, to adopt inflammatory anti-Israel resolutions about the Israel-Hamas war. Please urge your city council to lead with empathy and to ensure all local residents feel supported. To know more and to get addresses of the different city councils, go to jcrc.org. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Sandy Zimmerman, a board member of the East Bay International Jewish Film Festival, who will introduce our treasured speaker, Fred Rosenbaum.
Well, good evening, everybody. Reva, thank you very much. If you have not muted yourself, please do that so we can have Fred speak uninterrupted. And we're going to be taking questions at the end of Fred's presentation. So if you have a question for Fred, please put it in the chat box. It's at the bottom of your screen. And we'll monitor the questions, and at the end of the presentation, we'll ask a few questions as time allows. Now, let's talk a little bit about Fred. Many of you may know him and know of him, but I want to make sure that those that are new to Fred have an understanding of what this man brings to the table. He's a noted author, historian, and adult educator. He is a founder and the director of the former Lehrhaus Judaica in Berkeley, California, described as the largest Jewish adult education center in the Western United States. Fred earned a bachelor's degree at Washington University in St. Louis, and then he studied the history of Nazi Germany as a Fulbright Fellow in West Germany. He earned a master's degree in European history at the University of California, right here in Berkeley. Inspired by the life of Franz Rosenzweig, he left traditional academia in '74 to co-found Lehrhaus Judaica with the late Seymour Fromer. It is finally known as the grandparent of Community Adult Learning Institution. And his many books include Cosmopolitans, a social and cultural history of the Jews of the San Francisco Bay Area. Taking Risks, a Jewish youth in the Soviet partisans and his unlikely life in California. Visions of Reform, Congregation Emmanuel and the Jews of San Francisco, 1849 to 1999. And Here There Are No Sarahs. Fred will also be joining us in January to talk about Chinese Jewry after the enjoyable film Noodle. And you'll hear more about that through your communications from us. So Fred, thanks for speaking tonight on this wonderful film, Gloomy Sunday. So take it away, Fred.
Okay, thank you, Sandy, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to also thank Reva for arranging all this, and Millie for her great help on the tech side. And as Reva said, we meet tonight with heavy hearts, with Israel at war. But we feel that learning should go on, and that it can bring comfort in these times, and also help build community. This film is set in majestic Budapest, on the banks of the Danube, set in the Buda Hills. It was very much a Jewish city. We often think of the influence of the Jews on New York. Well, in the Big Apple, they make up 12% of the population. In pre-war Budapest, they were nearly twice that percentage, about 250,000, Europe's second largest Jewish community, surpassed only by Warsaw. In the early 20th century, their golden age, Budapest Jews tended to be highly successful and highly acculturated, not altogether different than San Francisco Jews. Jews in the Hungarian capital dominated medicine and law, business and banking, music and art. They excelled especially in science. Two of the nuclear physicists who worked with Oppenheimer in Los Alamos were from Budapest, Leo Szilard and Edward Teller. Now, I've often spoken about such outsized Jewish achievements in cities such as Berlin and Vienna. What sets this metropolis apart was the way Jews shaped popular culture, influencing the masses through risque music halls and vaudeville shows and avant-garde movies, stand-up comedy, daring photography, and satirical magazines. They were conspicuous as the owners and patrons of the city's coffee houses, which were the opposite of your neighborhood Starbucks. Often located in elegant, high-ceiling halls with linen tablecloths, waiters attired in waistcoats, white shirts, and bow ties. They were a meeting place for all rungs of the social ladder because the entry price was only buying a cup of coffee. Academics, authors, artists discussed the weighty issues of the day, while working class men and women unburdened themselves of their struggles and told off-colored jokes. There were about 500 of these coffee houses in the city, many open through the night, and some offering gambling and prostitution as well. Now, it's not only that Jews were in the forefront of the nonconformist spirit inundating Budapest, but also that Jewish qualities permeated the atmosphere of the whole city. Intellectual curiosity, sardonic humor, experimental art and design, and above all, a yearning for social and economic change. And this included sexual liberation, for which Budapest was famous. And so the menage a trois, which the film revolves around, was not that all uncommon. I will return to the love triangle later in this talk. To sum up, the city was rapidly becoming as modern as any on the continent, and Jews were suffusing it with their kind of modernity. Now, there's a quip that goes, even if you are not Jewish, if you're from New York, you're Jewish. Now, there's only a grain of truth in that. But this notion carries a lot more weight for Budapest. And this predominant Jewish influence was resented by the anti-Semites as degenerate, as a threat to tradition. They called the metropolis Sin City and Judapest. Now, the film reflects the growing anxiety as Nazi Germany extends its power in Europe and then over Hungary in particular. Although much of the ambiance of glorious pre-World War I Budapest remained, its optimism, its imagination, its irreverence, it gradually became clear to Jew and Gentile alike that the golden age had given way to a dreadful new reality. Hungary in the interwar period was plagued by an influenza epidemic, a worldwide depression, the rise of Hitler and Stalin, all contributing to social dislocation, in short, despair. And all this even before the catastrophic Nazi occupation beginning in 1944. Suicides in Budapest spiked in these dark decades. Did the melancholy song, Gloomy Sunday, cause people to take their own lives? Actually, no. A ballad, no matter how morose, rarely has that effect. It might have been the final straw for some already predisposed to self-destruction who played the song as a kind of funereal dirge, a mournful, sublime farewell to the world. Let's look at the first image. Okay, if you can just zoom in on that and make it a little larger. Thank you. Thank you. Now, although the film has it otherwise, in fact, Gloomy Sunday was composed by a Budapest Jew, Rezo Seres, who also wrote the original lyrics in early 1933, just as Hitler was coming to power. In the novel, Trauriger Sonntag, which is only in German, he is not named at all, but simply called der Komponist, the composer. Here you see the real Seres at the top, two images of him. Below, I just put the actor, playing the composer. Like Andras in the film, Seres played in a Budapest restaurant, but one very different from the fine dining offered at Szabo's. Seres performed nightly at a plain pub. Today, it's a tourist attraction because of the famous song. At that time, it was an eatery and bar favored by artists, bohemian types, and the Jewish working class. But the film is accurate in depicting the composer racked with guilt because his song was widely reported to have brought about many deaths over the years. Seres survived the Holocaust. He returned to perform at the same Budapest restaurant after the war. But he himself committed suicide in 1968. Now, as the film shows, Billie Holiday sang a popular version of Gloomy Sunday in the 1940s. It was also sung by Sarah Vaughan, Paul Robeson, and other acclaimed virtuosos. But the lyrics changed greatly over the years. Let's look at the original words composed by Rezo Seres. And you see, I have it below. People are heartless, greedy, and wicked. Love has died. The world has come to an end. Hope has ceased to have a meaning. Cities are being wiped out. Shrapnel is making music. He is referring to the catastrophe of World War I. Shrapnel is making music. This was unprecedented in its time, In World War I, 20 million people were killed, including 600,000 Hungarian soldiers. Of course, grave disillusionment after the Great War was hardly uncommon among sensitive artists and authors. One need only think of the classic All Quiet on the Western Front, in this literary genre of the lost generation. Seres did not see action himself. He was not conscripted due to an injury suffered in his earlier career as a trapeze artist. Now, let's look at the next slide, image. Billie Holiday's version is far gentler than the original. Little white flowers won't waken you, not where the black coach of sorrow has taken you. Angels have no thought of ever returning you. Would they be angry if I thought of joining you? So it's melancholy, but it's not on the same level as Seres. Okay, we can remove that image. Now, if Seres's ballad, dismal though it was, did not directly cause the surge of suicides in Budapest, among the highest in the world, by the way, what does explain it? Compared with Warsaw, for example, per capita, there were about 50% more people in interwar Budapest taking their own lives. Budapest's Jewish community had 4 times the rate of suicide of the Polish capital. Now, first, a caveat. Statistics on self-destruction are hard to verify. Many go unreported because of the stigma often attached to it. There was a flagrant case in Warsaw of a Jewish undertaker who falsified many death certificates to spare the family's shame. But even if we can't calibrate the extent, we know of a suicide epidemic in Budapest. Now, the father of sociology, Emil Durkheim, in his path-breaking study of 1897, was the first to put suicide in the context of social causes. And this is expressed in a song. The world is crumbling all about me. Nothing has meaning anymore. So this is different than someone taking his own life because of a scandal, let's say, or a death of a loved one, or a severe business reversal, or unbearable physical pain. This is different. The film shows Andras killing himself because of the rapid breakdown in society, namely the Nazi occupation, which utterly humiliates him. The film also portrays the suicide cycle, meaning that the more the mass media plays up the act, the more likely it becomes. And then it will be the subject of even more sensational stories, resulting in even more suicides, and so on. Related to this are the icons of self-destruction, such as the Golden Gate Bridge, from which 2,000 people have leaped into the bay. In Budapest, this is the Liberty Bridge that you see on the screen, known as the Suicide Bridge. This is where Hans and later Andras are about to end their lives. Open to pedestrians, it's easy to jump off. Now, Jews had very low rates of suicide until the past century, because in earlier times, the large majority felt bound by Jewish law and tradition. And in Judaism, I think you all know, taking one's own life is a grievous sin. The person is to be denied a full Jewish funeral. Now, the rabbis have usually gotten around this ancient prohibition by saying Well, the departed was not in a proper frame of mind. In Hungary, even the Orthodox rabbis were lenient in this regard until the suicide epidemic of the 1930s. Desperate for a deterrent, they reverted to the traditional practice of withholding Jewish burial. But that only hurt the family and friends of the deceased and did not stem the rising tide of self-destruction. Now, analyzing Budapest's wave of interwar suicides, historians and sociologists, they usually focused on a sudden change in one's identity due to external causes, like Andras' experience. A prominent Budapest Jew killed himself in 1938, left a note stressing that he is not in debt to anyone, but can no longer live in a country that has singled out the Jews for discrimination. Now, to understand a person being so shattered by political and social upheaval, we turn to modern Hungarian Jewish history. Let's look at the next image, please. Okay, if we can expand it, that's it, perfect. Before World War I, the Jews in Hungary were part of the Habsburg Empire. And you see that right in the center in green, dark green. This stretched across Central Europe. Look at the size of this. And by the way, it lasted for half a millennium. It goes from Russia all the way to Italy and Switzerland. It goes from Germany all the way down to the Balkans. This Habsburg Empire, Austria-Hungary, was about the size of the state of Texas. Now, a dramatic change occurred in 1848 with the accession to the throne of Emperor Franz Joseph, one of the most benevolent rulers toward the Jews in European history. He reigned for an unprecedented 68 years, during which his Jewish subjects took giant steps toward emancipation and acculturation, especially in Hungary. In 1867, they received equal rights for the first time. And later, Judaism became officially recognized as a state religion along with Christianity. Now let's scroll down to the lower map. And we see the ethnicity here. This is a vast empire, but look how many people, how many different kinds of people are under the emperor's rule. You see there are Germans, there are Hungarians, there are Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Slovenes, other Serbs, Romanians, Italians. This is a mixture. Okay. And this ethnicity will be very, very important in understanding the situation. Okay, let's look at the next slide, please. Now, 1867 was also when Hungarians succeeded in gaining nearly full autonomy within the empire, now called Austria-Hungary. Just since 1867, it's Austria-Hungary, a dual monarchy with Budapest and Vienna as co-capitals. Hungary became its own enormous kingdom with its own parliament and army. And this map shows you the scale of this. Hungary is actually about the same size as what's called the Crown Lands, all the rest of the Habsburg Empire. Then we look below at the image right below that, and we see Hungary is in the yellow, and the rest of Austria-Hungary is in brown. So this is really a very major part of this empire. You see some of the regions that it covers, including Transylvania, Transcarpathia, good deal of Croatia. Okay, we can remove that. Thank you. Now, given the opportunities afforded by emancipation, oppressed Jews in neighboring Slavic lands migrated to Hungary in large numbers, especially to Budapest. Between 1867 and 1914, the population of the booming city tripled, but the Jewish population far outstripped that. It quintupled from around 50,000 to 250,000 on the eve of World War I. Quintupled in less than 2 generations. This Jewish community, growing exponentially, climbed higher and faster than any in European history. Jews were 5% of the Kingdom of Hungary in 1910, but 60% of the physicians and almost half the lawyers. They were in parliament. They were in the civil service. Remarkably, they owned 2/3 of all the businesses with 20 or more workers. Dozens were corporate titans. We see Laszlo thrilled at the arrival at his restaurant of the elegantly dressed Mendel family, industrialists who he says employ 30,000 people. Unique on the continent, hundreds of Jews were given titles of nobility. In these decades before World War I, Hungary was often called a paradise for Jews. Under such favorable conditions, it's unsurprising that, especially in cosmopolitan Budapest, Jews were the most assimilated in Europe. Many changed their names, often to the Hungarian name Szabo, that of the movie's main character. They now switched from German or Yiddish to Hungarian as their primary language. They developed a unique branch of Judaism called Neolog, somewhat similar to the conservative movement in America. But for mid-19th century East Central Europe, it was a radical break with tradition. Most Neologs were so patriotic, they didn't call themselves Jews, but rather Hungarians of the Mosaic faith. And they claimed to be ethnic Hungarians, even though very few were. In fact, most of them had roots in Poland or Russia. Let's look at the next image, please. As early as 1859, they erected a monumental synagogue on Dohany Street in the heart of the city. It still stands, the largest in Europe and second in the world, only to the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem. Note the Moorish style of the exterior. This is to evoke the golden age in Spain, when Jew, Christian, and Muslim lived in harmony. Okay, we can remove that. Thank you. Budapest Jewry had the highest rates of intermarriage and conversion to Christianity of any city on the continent. Needless to say, there were few Zionists here or other Jewish activists that were numerous in Poland, such as Yiddishists and Bundists. Let's look at the next slide, please. Now, Magyar is the word for ethnic Hungarian. And after 1867, Jews became the most loyal Magyars and of great value to the ruling class in Budapest, because their sprawling Hungarian kingdom included large numbers of other nationalities, such as Slovaks, Croats, Czechs, and others that were struggling for independence. Now you see, this is just the Kingdom of Hungary within the Habsburg Empire. And look at this. This map shows you that the dark green is Hungarian. They have, you know, certainly a large population, but look at how many others there are here. As we noted before, for the Habsburg Empire in general, this is within the Kingdom of Hungary. Again, Romanians, Germans, Slovaks, Croatians, Serbian. Here it says Ruthenian. That is similar to, that really means Ukrainian. Italian, Slovene, Czech, Polish, Bulgarian. But Jews are considered Magyars. And let's look at the chart below. Look at this. Just in Hungary, here's the population. Now, of all those ethnic minority groups, you didn't see Jews there. Why? Because they're counted as Hungarian. And notice the Hungarians have 54.5%. The Jews are 5%. Without the Jews, the Hungarians would actually be a minority in their own country. So the Jews often managed estates of Hungarian aristocrats in the outer regions, and they were agents of Magyarization. Their allegiance both to the crown and the aristocracy was never in question. In other words, they are, especially in the outlying districts, they are the standard bearers of Magyarization. And that's very important given these restless minority groups that were really struggling for independence at the time. Okay, we can remove that. So this Hungarian Jewish symbiosis, it came crashing down after World War I, which remade the map of Europe. Hungary was one of the biggest losers. Let's look at the next map, please, the next image. The Treaty of Trianon. This is named for the palace at Versailles where it was signed. It stripped the defeated Hungary of more than 2/3 of its territory, including its seaports on the Adriatic coast, there on the lower left of this map. They no longer have that. Hungary is left only with a portion in the white. All of those slanted brown lines, they lost all that territory. Let's look at the map below. Here you see what happened here. A lot of it went to Czechoslovakia. A lot went to Yugoslavia. These were states carved out of the Habsburg monarchy. Transylvania went to Romania. This is considered a mutilation of the motherland. What remained, let's go back to the upper map on this page. That's it. What remained was merely a rump, landlocked country, and one obsessed with revanchism. That is, undoing the hated treaty and regaining as much of the lost provinces as possible. So furious resentment fueled the hyper-nationalism of the interwar period. By the way, Hungary today, a century later, has the same diminished borders that you see here. And this so-called disgrace of Trianon is part of Viktor Orban's ethnocentrism and anger at the West. Okay, you can remove that now. Let me turn to the Hungarians of the Mosaic faith after Trianon. They're no longer needed as a loyal constituency supporting a country comprised of many restless nationalities, because the new, far smaller state is over 90% Hungarian. The Jews at 5% are now the largest minority group and suddenly viewed as a foreign element in this xenophobic land. Let's look at the next slide. This is Admiral Miklos Horthy. From 1920 all the way up to 1944, Hungary was ruled not by a benign emperor, but rather by a right-wing dictator, Admiral Miklos Horthy, who reflects the so-called polite anti-Semitism of the land-holding gentry, which used the Jews during the multicultural Habsburg Empire, but had no warm feelings toward them and had no use for them now. And by the way, this title, Admiral Horthy, that itself reflects the Hungarian indignation, because he's an admiral, but they no longer even have a navy or a seacoast. Okay, let's scroll down a little so we can see a little more. He loves to ride his horse throughout Budapest. One biography is called The Admiral on Horseback. And in the lower left, of course, you see this friendship with Hitler, which I'm going to speak about in more detail in a moment. Okay, we can remove that. Now, to make matters worse, immediately after World War I, Jews were conflated with Bolshevism and the Russian Revolution. This happened throughout Europe, but was nowhere near as incendiary as in Hungary. Amidst the chaos at the end of hostilities, which brought down 4 giant empires, a communist regime was imposed on Budapest by the demagogue Bela Kun, who seized private property, ransacked churches, executed his opponents, including Catholic priests. Not only was Bela Kun Jewish, his real name was Bela Kun, but so were 20 of his 26 commissars. The Hungarian Soviet Republic lasted only a few months. It never really got much out of Budapest. It was brutally overthrown by Admiral Horthy's White Terror, as this counter-revolution was known. Meanwhile, the frenzied populace carried out pogroms throughout the country. Even though very few Jews were communists, the fact that so many communists were Jews planted this poisonous stereotype in the public mind. Instead of being Magyar standard bearers, almost overnight, the Jews were seen as trying to ruin the country. Yet they carried on between the wars as if little changed since the glorious days of the Habsburg monarchy. perhaps because of the toleration and prosperity they had enjoyed for so long, and their loving embrace of Magyar culture, they were in denial, even more than German Jews. As early as 1920, Admiral Horthy enacted a punishing quota for Jewish admission to medical and law schools, which met with almost no Jewish protest. Jews continued to trumpet their loyalty to Hungary and its government. Now, the film opens when the prospects for Jews darken further due to Horthy's deepening friendship with the Third Reich. He was impressed with Hitler's military might and crusade against communism. Most important, he felt that Germany, itself trying to regain lost territory, might be able to shake up the geopolitical landscape to Hungary's advantage. In early 1938, the Nazis annexed Austria and threatened to absorb the strategic Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia. Horthy concluded this was the time to throw in his lot with the Fuhrer. To curry favor, he felt he needed to conform to Nazi ideology. So in May 1938, like Hitler's ally Mussolini, Horthy issued the first of the racial laws, modeled after the Nuremberg laws. They forbade intermarriage. They barred Jews from the civil service and limited their participation in economic and professional life. Being singled out in this way finally jolted most Hungarian Jews out of their passivity. And we see Laszlo's reaction, because being a Jew means so little to him. He says he's as much a Jew as he is an Iroquois. So he's stunned that now Jewish ethnicity defines his place in society and determines his future. In August 1938, Horthy made a state visit to Berlin and met with Hitler. The following month, as part of the infamous Munich Agreement, the appeasement of Germany, Hungary received much of the territory it had lost to Czechoslovakia. Let's look at the next map. This pattern repeated itself over the next 3 years. Harsher and harsher racial laws, one of them requiring Laszlo to put his restaurant in the name of his non-Jewish girlfriend, coincided with Horthy receiving more and more of the territory lost at Trianon. And look at this, he gets back more than half of what they had lost. That huge section in northern Transylvania from Romania, that's a very big piece. That's especially important because there are a lot of ethnic Hungarians living there. Then he gets all that from Slovakia, from Poland, from Yugoslavia. In short, his internal racial anti-Semitism seemed to yield the best results in foreign policy. In 1940, Hungary formally joined the Axis, only the fourth country after Germany, Italy, and Japan, and later joined the Wehrmacht's fateful invasion of the Soviet Union. Okay, we can remove that map now. But even this was not enough for the fanatics to the right of Horthy, a terrifying militia known as the Arrow Cross. 300,000 vitriolic anti-communists and anti-Semites. Like the Nazis, they sought to make their country Judenfrei, free of the Jews. For years, while Jews were being exterminated in the rest of Nazi-occupied Europe, Hungary, again like Hitler's ally Italy, was not taken over by German troops, and no Jews were deported. Despite the intense pressure on Horthy from Berlin and from the Arrow Cross, which threatened to remove him with a coup d'etat, the admiral was no Quisling or Pétain. He had anti-Jewish inclinations. He could enact legal discrimination and even severe deprivation. Many Jews were forced to work on the Eastern Front as forced laborers. But he opposed genocide. He felt that the deportation of Hungarian citizens would be a violation of his country's sovereignty. Moreover, by 1943, the opportunistic Horthy realized that Germany was going to lose, and his pro-Hitler strategy had been a colossal failure. Regarding his own fate, he knew that if he enabled the final solution, after an Allied victory, he would be hanged as a war criminal. The Germans, of course, sensed him wavering. So in March 1944, Wehrmacht and SS units suddenly invaded and occupied the country. That is when the Holocaust in Hungary began, that late date of March 44. Horthy remained regent, but was stripped of most of his powers. The reins turned over to a Nazi-installed puppet. In October of that momentous year, the Nazis put in the ferocious Arrow Cross as Hungary's rulers. But even before that, its militia had massacred Jews and played a major role in rounding them up and shoving them into cattle cars destined for Auschwitz. As you see in the film, Laszlo is seized not by the SS, but by Arrow Cross militiamen. Almost 500,000 Hungarian Jews who had been oppressed, but who had remained alive during nearly 5 years of war, were now murdered in less than 2 months. 500,000. This was the most efficient and effective operation, we can use those words, in the entire Shoah. The mastermind of this crime against humanity was Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Eichmann. For some reason, he is referred to as Lieutenant Colonel Eichbaum in the novel and the movie. I don't know why. The filmmakers could hardly have been worried about being sued for defamation by the Eichmann family. In any case, the film accurately portrays Eichmann's mania for exterminating Jews. Even before D-Day, June of 1944, it was abundantly clear that the Axis would lose. Yet the Nazis believed that if they couldn't win the war, they could win the genocide. Now, one striking characteristic of the Holocaust in Hungary, it's missing from the film, is that it took place primarily outside of Budapest. Most of the Jews in the capital were actually spared. The victims, the 500,000, were primarily in the outlying provinces, which, due to the German territorial awards of the prior few years, included Yiddish-speaking Jews and shtetls who lived among Slovaks, Croats, Romanians, and others. Unlike Budapest Jews, they were largely Orthodox or Hasidic and easily identifiable. They had few resources or friendships with trustworthy Gentiles. They were generally passive. Admiral Horthy gave little thought to these foreign Jews as he viewed them. And to the extent he had any influence left, he sought to help Budapest Jews, whom he considered Magyars. Also, the Hungarian capital, of course, was the center of foreign embassies and consulates, many foreign diplomats. 10,000 were saved with Swedish protective passes issued by the courageous Raoul Wallenberg. Even more were rescued by the Swiss vice consul Karl Lutz. Many others went into hiding. Many thousands in Budapest were executed by the Arrow Cross, including 800 shot to death on the Danube who fell into the water. There is a haunting contemporary memorial on the riverbank of 60 iron shoes because the killers demanded that the victims remove their footwear first. Yet Budapest Jews were rarely put on transports to Auschwitz, and surely not from the main train station as shown in the movie. That's why at war's end, roughly 120,000 Jews were still living in the capital, by far the largest Jewish community in East Central Europe. It has remained so to this day, centered around the Doheny Street Synagogue, and the odds would have been favorable for someone like Laszlo Sabo, well off and well connected. Now, how plausible is the character of businessman and Colonel Hans Wieck? Well, there's no case of a senior SS officer having been hailed after the war as a savior of Jews. And it would not be someone who extorted $1,000 a person, worth over $30,000 today. Because after the war, many survivors would have made the bribe known publicly. Now, what of Hans Wieck's ultimate punishment? Most survivors refrained from violent revenge. But there were some notable exceptions, and I co-authored the memoir of one who firebombed the home of the man who had betrayed his family. Yet these vengeful deeds invariably occurred after the opportunity arose. Soon after the opportunity arose, when the fury was at its peak. Later, Nazi hunters Simon Wiesenthal, Beata, and Serge Klarsfeld, they were active for many decades, but used legal means to bring war criminals to justice. The Israeli Mossad tracked down and killed the perpetrator as late as 1965. But it is highly unlikely that 50 years after the fact, an individual would carry out an assassination. Although I agree it makes for a dramatic and satisfying end to the story. So the film strays from probability in several places. But of course, it's not a documentary or even a docudrama. It's based on a novel, by definition, fiction. And the historical events are the background of the movie. The foreground is the sensuous three-way love affair, which certainly is plausible for unconventional Budapest in this period. It's a menage a trois different from adultery. None of the three is married, and there's no deception. Each is fully aware of what the other two are doing. Nor can this be called a threesome, which usually denotes a sporadic, even fleeting sexual encounter of three people, but not a long-term committed relationship. On the contrary, Laszlo, Ilana, and Andras are deeply in love with one another. The men start out as rivals, even belligerents, but there's a growing affection between them, and perhaps a hint of homoeroticism. In one scene, a picnic by a lake, they both glance at the alluring Ilana skipping in the shallow water. And without words, each acknowledges to the other his infatuation with her. Their facial expressions saying, "Aren't we the fortunate two who are intimate with this ravishing young woman?" None of the three has any moral qualms about their behavior. That they so easily fall into this arrangement reflects the free-thinking Budapest I discussed earlier. From the turn of the century, a women's movement, which won suffrage even before the United States, also sought to challenge traditional beliefs about marriage, motherhood, and sexuality. Like so much else that was transgressive in this city, its leaders were Jewish. The most influential was Renee Erdos, raised in an Orthodox home, who became flagrantly secular. She was immensely popular as a writer of erotic love stories in the interwar period that explored the innermost feelings of women who felt trapped in a patriarchal society but broke out of the mold to gain their freedom. She wrote vividly, graphically, about cross-dressing, Oedipal relationships, and lesbianism. The kind of love triangle in the film appears in the memoir literature of that era. The Budapest Jew Arthur Koestler, author of the classic Darkness at Noon, writes that in the 1930s, especially in the coffee houses frequented by writers, artists, and musicians, he sometimes saw not only couples, but thruples, as they were known in English, spending many hours of tenderness together. He writes that their long-term relationships were open and not the subject of gossip. Now, let me conclude with a thought about the German title of the movie, Ein Lied von Liebe und Tod, a song of love and death. To me, that describes Budapest. Like Paris, the proverbial city of love, like that, the Queen of the Danube exudes an atmosphere of romance, all kinds of romance. But Budapest has also been a city of death, whether by one's own hand or by a murderous regime. And I include the Soviets, who liberated the city from the Nazis, but then proceeded to ravage it, and dominate it for the next 45 years, even sending in tanks to crush the revolution in 1956. So, as in few other places in the world, intense pleasure and pain have coexisted here. And the film brilliantly shows how the lives of individuals have been shaped by these extremes. Thank you.